So, what if I told you that for a bunch of medieval thinkers, one of the most powerful symbols for Jesus Christ wasn't a lamb or a shepherd, but this? Yep. Today, we are diving into the really strange and fascinating story of the Jesus hermaphrodite.
Okay, so this image here, it comes to us from a 15th century alchemical text. And I mean, just take a close look. You've got a single being with 2 heads, 4 arms, and yeah, both male and female features, all being clutched by this massive black eagle. It is a really strange and provocative image, right? But its hidden meaning is even more surprising.
Because somehow, a group of people back then looked at this figure, a symbol of dual sexuality, and saw a perfect metaphor for Jesus Christ. So the question is how? I mean, how on earth did they make that leap? That's the mystery we're going to try and unravel today.
To get our heads around this bizarre connection, we have to go back in time a bit. We need to trace this symbol all the way back to its source. And that source, believe it or not, isn't in a church or even an alchemist's lab. It's in classical mythology. The whole concept really gets its start with the Roman poet Ovid and his tragic story of Hermaphroditus, the beautiful son of Hermes and Aphrodite. In the myth, a water nymph named Salamis just completely falls for him. But when he turns her down, she prays to the gods for them to be united forever, and their 2 bodies are literally physically fused into one.
And get this. Listen to how Ovid describes what happens next. The new being wasn't just half man, half woman. It was something totally new, a third thing that was, in his own words, neither and yet both. And that idea of holding 2 complete opposites in one unified form, that is the absolute core of this symbol's power.
But this is where the story takes a really sharp, dark turn, because this mythological idea of fusion was a whole world away from how medieval society viewed actual people born with ambiguous anatomy. The symbol and the reality, they could not have been treated more differently.
You know, in the medical, legal, and religious texts from that time, a person born intersex was literally classified as a monster. Their existence was seen as this divine punishment for some sin their parents committed, a huge threat to a social order that needed a clear line between male and female. So the goal was never to understand this ambiguity, it was to get rid of it, to force the person into one box, whichever one was seen as predominant. And keeping that in mind makes what happens next with this symbol totally mind-blowing.
Because then, this one group of thinkers looked at the very figure that society had labeled a monster, and they saw the complete opposite. They saw perfection. And these thinkers, they were the alchemists.
Now, the ultimate goal, the whole reason for being an alchemist, was to create the legendary Philosopher's Stone. And this wasn't just about turning lead into gold to get rich. It was way more profound than that. They believed it was this mystical substance that could take anything imperfect, from a chunk of metal to the human soul itself, and bring it to a state of absolute perfection. So how did they think you could create this stuff? Well, the entire alchemical process was built on one central idea, the union of opposites. You had to take what they called sulfur, which represented the hot, dry, male principle, and fuse it with mercury, the cold, wet, female principle. This sacred marriage would then create something entirely new, a hybrid that held the perfected power of both. And that is exactly why they latched onto the figure of the hermaphrodite. All of a sudden, it wasn't a biological mistake or a social monster. It was the perfect visual metaphor for their entire life's work, the complete union of male and female principles into one perfect, world-changing thing.
So the alchemists had already done the unthinkable. They took a social monster and turned it into a philosophical ideal. But oh no, they didn't stop there. They were about to make their final, and by far most audacious leap of all.
See, a lot of alchemists didn't just see their work as science. To them, it was a spiritual practice, like a small-scale imitation of God's creation, and they started seeing direct parallels everywhere. The union of opposites in their lab, well, that was like the union of human and divine in Jesus. The miraculous creation of the stone, the virgin birth. Even the chemical process of death and rebirth that happened in their flasks, that was a mirror of the crucifixion and resurrection. And this leads them to this incredible conclusion. Just think about the logic here. If the Philosopher's Stone is a hermaphrodite because it unites male and female, and the stone is a metaphor for Christ, then it must follow that Christ himself is the ultimate hermaphrodite, the perfect uniter of all opposites.
And they were not subtle about this. They just came right out and said it, with a clarity that is still pretty shocking today.
There's this German alchemical text from around 1420, the Book of the Holy Trinity, that puts it bluntly. Within God, and therefore Christ, is everything. His own mother and his own father, the feminine and the masculine.
And what's wild is, this idea of a gender-fluid divine wasn't just hiding in obscure alchemical books. It was bubbling up in other places too. Around the same time in Germany, the cult of Saint Wilgefortis got really popular. She was a crucified female saint who was often shown with a beard, a figure whose very image blurs the lines between male and female, visually tying her right back to Christ.
So when you really step back and look at it, you can see the full, incredible journey this one single symbol has taken, right? It starts in a classical myth as this tragic figure. Then it gets twisted by society into a symbol of monstrosity. It's reclaimed by alchemists as an emblem of absolute perfection. And then finally, in this truly radical move, it evolves into a profound metaphor for the divine, for Christ himself.
And that kind of leaves us with one final fascinating question. What does it tell us about the power of symbols that a concept so feared in the real world could be lifted up into an image of the divine? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the very things a culture tries to push to the margins as monstrous can be reimagined by others as a symbol of ultimate wholeness and perfection.